So Solomon Serwanja will be handling these stories, and of course LRA's Dominic Ongwen before the ICC, and he was facing 70 counts. That case has definitely begun. Let's now hand it over to my correspondent in Uganda, Solomon Serwanja, to just take up that conversation on some of the stories that have been making headlines in Uganda this year, 2016, even as we count down. And we hope he'll sing Merry Christmas for us. A very good evening to you, Solomon. Thank you very much for coming in. I'll now hand it over to you.
Very good evening to you. We are equally counting down the year 2016, but it has been quite an eventful year, just like we are taking us down the memory lane, right from the elections of the February elections to, of course, the re-election of President Yoweri Museveni. And these elections have actually been contested by key opposition leader Dr. Akisa Wandera. Matter of fact, former Prime Minister John Patrick Amama Mbabazi took the Electoral Commission and President Yoweri Museveni to the Supreme Court that unanimously decided that he was the duly elected president of Uganda. And that forms the very background and backbone of our discussion tonight. We're going to be joined by a veteran journalist and celebrated, I want to prefer to call him political analyst. He's called Joseph Sabiti, joining us on Bottom Line East Africa. Joseph Sabiti is a journalist who is working with NBS Television. He's a political reporter, but also does a lot of political commentary. Many thanks for joining us on Bottom Line, Joseph. Let's start off with the elections. February 2016, contested election really between three people. That is President Yoweri Museveni, Dr. Akisa Wandera, and former Prime Minister John Patrick Amama Mbabazi. As we are winding up the year 2016, it seems like it is one of the big stories that made headlines here in Uganda.
Absolutely. I think it's actually the only story that's still making headlines. Ugandans politicked before, during, and they're still politicking after elections. It looked like a tight race between the three big shots in the politics of this country. Remember, Mbabazi had just fallen out with President Museveni. He was the powerful Secretary General of the ruling NRM party. And so there was all that political clout around him and, so many expectations and myths surrounding his power in politics. At the end of it all, it was reduced to a two-horse race between two arch-rivals, President Yoweri Museveni and retired Colonel Dr. Akisa Wandera. And that is how the sprinting towards the finishing line was. So Mbabazi actually entered the race as a powerful former Prime Minister and former Secretary General of the ruling party, and emerged as a very huge political weakling who up to now, I believe, has not recovered from the political shocks of 2016. And
of course, he hasn't come out in the, in the public. It has been long since we last had him make a statement. But let's talk about Dr. Akisa Wandera, who has remained on front pages of newspapers and in the headlines of Uganda's television stations. To date, he still contests the February 2016 elections. He still thinks that he was the rightfully voted president of Uganda. Matter of fact, he swore, he held a Bible. There was footage when he was swearing in as head of state, a case that he still battles with in court for treason, among others. Do you think that Dr. Akisa Wandera should move on? Isn't it so fight? It's almost a year. Shouldn't we move on, and shouldn't he move on and perhaps look for another strategy, especially that he still fronts defiance?
Well, I think the bottom line is that he has been able to dare the might of the state. We are in a country where the political party that is in power is merged with the state. And so there's no difference between the NRM and the government of Uganda. And so that has seen police act in a very biased, in a very unprofessional manner, especially regarding containing Dr. Akisa Wandera. They have deployed a barracks around his home. And so what does he do? He goes to court. Court orders that the police should vacate his home, and they defy the court order. And so they were saying Dr. Wandera is committing treason by promoting the defiance campaign, and police ends up joining the defiance campaign. And so you can't tell a man who has a huge following, every time he's arrested or he's stopped from leaving his home, it's a headline in all the print and major broadcast news outlets in this country. And so you also have 2021 around the corner. He's still eligible, He hasn't clocked the 75 age cap that is captured in our constitution. And the people in opposition still see him as the flag bearer for change. And so it's going to be a long time before Dr. Wandera actually disappears. I don't think he's going anywhere. My guess is that he will be on the ballot again in the next election, that is in 2021.
And I think also, do you think the arrest and rearrest of Dr. Akisa Wandera, because it has been happening, I mean, look through 2015 through to 2016, Wandera is arrested, tear gas on the streets, rearrested, he makes headlines, captures international attention, and eventually gains out of that by getting political capital.
Absolutely, the state is playing to his trap. I mean, he goes out and they arrest him, they take him to court. He's Uganda's most tried politician of our time, 0 conviction so far. Every time they take him to court, the cases are dismissed with shame. He has faced treason, he has faced rape, he has faced whatever kind of charge that you can put against a politician. And so every time he's taken to court, many people in this country believe it's a joke. And so the state has been made to look foolish because of the way it is acting. And many people actually believe that the president and the structures of the state are afraid of this man, retired Colonel Dr. Akisa Wandera. But the question many people continue to ask is, has he benefited from this status that he has built? You know, he has been on the ballot 4 times. Every time consistently he has claimed that actually he has been rigged. And remember, the last time he went to court, it was a 3-2 judgment, very close. He almost overturned the elections, and court actually agreed that the elections were not free and fair, but the magnitude did not affect the outcome. And so he has that judicial record that he continues to rely on. And I think the question is whether he wants to continue this way or he wants to bow out. A few days back, he was responding to journalists who asked him why he doesn't step aside to let someone from the opposition Forum for Democratic Change take charge of leading the forces of change. And he said, look, as long as this man with a heart is still here, the struggle continues. And so we are going to see more of Dr. Wandera, and the news headlines are going to be actually captured much more by his presence.
But certainly, Dr. Akisa Wandera is one of the people to look out for in 2017, especially as long as President Yoweri Museveni is in power, he will continue to oppose it. But that aside, eventually, against all odds and against all the efforts that Dr. Akisa Wandera tried to put on, and up to now is still challenging the elections, President Yoweri Museveni was sworn in as the head of state until 2021. Let's face it, on the day of his swearing in, he spoke really bad about the West, especially about the International Criminal Court and how it has been, not prosecuting, but persecuting African leaders. He's spoken about this in Kenya, in Nairobi, Kenya. He's been very vocal, and he has championed the move by African Union and heads of state to pull out of the International Criminal Court. And it seems to be working. South Africa has been one of the countries. Burundi has been one of the countries. And so all eyes are on Uganda. Do you think that President Yoweri Museveni is now going to also take the step to pull out of the International Criminal Court?
No doubt about that, Solomon. I think he has made up his mind. He wants out of the Rome Statute. But let's face it, it's a very clear contradiction. You know that our very own citizen, Dominic Ongwen, is facing trial at the ICC. President Yoweri Museveni was the first head of state to take his citizen to the ICC. Joseph Kony and the LRA commanders were taken to the ICC by President Museveni. And so when the wheels of the ICC begin to turn and there are prospects of him actually going to the same court, what does he do? He rallies other African leaders. He finds a natural ally in Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto, who were being, tried before the ICC at that time. He finds an ally in President Paul Kagame, whose Rwanda is not signatory to the Rome Statute. He finds an ally in President Pierre Nkurunziza of Burundi, whose country is in turmoil. He finds an ally in President Omar al-Bashir of Sudan, who is actually indicted, who is supposed to be arrested. Yeah, and so the African heads of state have turned themselves into a club that is actually fronting that anti-ICC idea. And from the African perspective, they will succeed, there's no doubt about that. But there will be stiff resistance from the West, and never mind the fact that some of the Western countries like the US are actually not signatories to the Rome Statute themselves, but they continue to push African leaders to actually stay there and continue to respect the ICC.
Well, but again, Joseph, let's face it, can Africa be able to sustain its own judicial system to book heads of state who have been running the government?
Future impossible tense. You have a clique of strongmen who wield absolute powers in their countries. They run the state the way they want. Go across the African continent. There are very few leaders. It's only the new crop of leaders like that in Kenya who are facing resistance, where they have a bit of active opposition, and the opposition in Kenya can actually mobilize and carry out political activities. But in some countries, for example here, Dr. Besigye can't leave his home. You know what happens next door in Rwanda. We don't need to discuss that. You know what happens in Burundi when you're against against the status quo. And so there's no hope for justice from the African perspective. The only thing the heads of state are trying to do, in my view, is to protect themselves. You look at what's happening in the DRC. Joseph Kabila's term of office is over. No roadmap for elections, no clear path for the country. All he's doing is tear-gassing those who are asking him to go and asking him for elections. And so these African heads of states, Solomon, cannot be trusted by any sober African.
Well, someone, of course, would contest that school of thought. But let's shift gears to the Kasese clashes. More than 65 people killed in what some described as a massacre of both civilians, and of course this also included the men in uniform. The Kasese clashes, President Yoweri Museveni has been, crucified for taking such measures. Where does this leave Uganda, especially come 2017?
Well, one thing is clear, that there are loud and louder voices calling for an independent probe into what exactly happened in Kasese. Many people think the security agencies were high-handed. You've seen a number of human rights organizations actually coming out to condemn what happened in Kasese, and many people are calling for an independent inquest into that incident. I think from the onset, I've always said that loss of lives on both sides is regrettable. We lost trained security personnel. That's a huge loss to the country. We also lost very many civilians. My belief is that there are children and women who are caught up in the crossfire in Kasese. And so somebody needs to give accountability for whatever happened. To make it worse, they ended up arresting a journalist who had gone to actually, join the family and other people during her traditional wedding ceremony. KTN's Joy Doreen Bira ended up arrested, incarcerated, and charged with very ridiculous, cases. And so it creates a very bad image for the country. I think the bottom line is somebody needs to tell the truth, and that responsibility lies with the state, because they have to give accountability for every life, for every incident that took place in Kasese. That will not come easy, but I see at some point the push will get so strong. But we also have a king who is in jail. There have been amendments. They're allowing him to have a TV, to have a fridge in jail.
In the jail, first of its
yes.
kind.
That will not solve the problem. I think the problem of Kasese is a political problem. The law and trials and incarcerations will not solve them. And so the state needs to rise to the occasion and sort it out. Solomon, remember, it's a traditional problem. It's not just President Museveni facing it. All his predecessors have faced it. So the only opportunity he has is to solve it once and for all.
And I think one of the things that we need to look at, Joseph, is that, well, the state would argue that they have a right to protect this country and the borders, to defend the territorial integrity of the state. Most allegations are coming through that the king, Charles Wesley Mumbere, wanted to break away from the main Uganda to create what they so-called Yida state. And so the government perhaps has been coming out to say that the security of the people is paramount, but also we had to defend the territorial integrity of this country.
No doubt about that. I think even in the Constitution, there's a provision for the instruments of coercion, the armed forces, to actually protect the territorial integrity of this country. But look, we have a state where there's heavy investment in intelligence. There are a lot of people deployed, border cyclists, taxi drivers, matatu drivers, used for intelligence. And so that heavy investment in intelligence should translate into actually action on the part of the state. Do you need to attack a palace, bombard it, shoot it indiscriminately, kill people to stop a king with all the forces, the guns, and all the power of the state? I think that would not be the best approach. Others would, the security forces reason that they had to do it. But the bottom line is, you cannot dare President Museveni, especially you cannot dare his seat, and he looks at you and smiles for months. That will never happen.
Well, Joseph, our time is fast spent. But before we can go back to the studios, let's a little bit discuss about the closure of Makerere University. One of Africa's rising stars, or recent stars, was closed by the president because lecturers were on strike and people had to go home. There was supposed to be a graduation ceremony in January 2017. It is most likely that it will not happen, and this could spill into 2017.
Absolutely. It's one of the biggest embarrassments of our times. It does not just embarrass Ugandan students. You know that we have Kenyans, Tanzanians, and other Africans coming to study in Makerere. And then most ridiculously, it was the president coming to close. The university, the president is a visitor to the university. There was the university council. There is the sector minister for education. There is a state minister for higher education. It should have been those institutions actually taking action. And so many people think that is a clear portrayal of actually the collapse of systems in this country. Many people think the only system that is alive is system President Yoweri Museveni.
Joseph Sabiti, you don't miss your words. Many thanks for giving us that overview and analysis of 2016. And of course, we do appreciate you for joining us for Bottom Line East Africa. Well, Joseph Sabiti is one of the reporters at NBS Television here, but also he's a political commentator, sharing his views with us about what made headlines. So we'll be discussing much more of the stories that made headline in 2016 next Friday. Most likely do make a date with us on Bottom Line East Africa. Back to you for more of the stories making headlines across the region and beyond.
Well, thank you very much, Solomon. I hope in 2017 it will not be system Yoweri Museveni and systems will actually start working in Uganda. But thank you very much for that very interesting conversation there from Uganda. And those are the highlights and some of the biggest stories that have been in Uganda in 2016, even as we count down into 2017. All right.